You're listening to the Food and Fitness Podcast, the show about all things related to food and fitness. Follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Food.Fitness Podcast. We're your hosts, Jackie Vandertoon,
Jessica White,
and Dave Marshall.
So on today's episode, we are joined by Dr. Matt Miller. Matt and I just had this little tiny conversation. He just recently graduated, so the whole doctor thing is a little bit new to him, but I am super excited because we are interviewing somebody I've known for quite a while. He did his undergraduate degree at Acadia University, his master's at Memorial, another degree undergrad at Sheridan College, and his PhD at Concordia. Matt is an instructor at the School of Kinesiology at Acadia University, teaching anatomy and physical activity related courses. He is a certified athletic therapist and has expertise in the area of physical literacy in children and adolescents. Matt has numerous peer-reviewed publications, as well as many presentations at various conferences. And I'm especially pleased to know Matt, as he was a student of mine twice, once at Acadia and again at Sheridan. I have to say how proud I am to see your growth throughout, and I'm really proud to call him both a friend and a colleague. Welcome, Matt. We truly appreciate you being here, considering you're in your first year of your teaching career, which, as you probably are finding out, comes with lots of new things. So, Matt, I'm going to take a little bit of a breath. Is there anything that I've missed that you would like to share with regards to your research interests?
Well, first, I'll just say thank you to all three of you for having me on your podcast. It's quite a pleasure of mine to be invited. Yes, Jackie, it's been a long time that I've known you, and it's surprising to walk into Sheridan and say, hey, I know that person. Well, let me think here. I guess my research interests kind of span more than just physical literacy, and I am also interested in injury prevention in general and how to kind of participate in sport and physical activity without getting hurt. It's a tall order, but that's something I'm interested in. And just to say, like, my experience as an AT or athletic therapist, so I'll probably say AT quite a bit, has informed a lot of this research interest in injury prevention. But that's kind of it. So physical literacy, injury prevention, those are the two areas that I kind of focus on, and hopefully have been able to connect through some of my publications. So that's kind of what my goal is there.
That's awesome. Matt, you have a multitude of areas that I think are fascinating for us on the Food and Fitness Podcast, but I'd really like to focus on one of your two areas, and one is your master's, in which you research understanding the effects of gut hormones and obesity and exercise and obesity, and two, your doctorate, which you focused on assessing movement competence and informing injury prevention in 8 to 12-year-old children, development of the child-focused injury risk screening. What made you explore two completely different areas for research, or did one influence the other?
Well, I have to say they're not necessarily two different areas. We're kind of focused on promoting physical activity in different populations. So looking at how, my master's was a very general, general title, but the main focus of my master's was seeing how obese males respond to an exercise intervention, high intensity. This was kind of around when CrossFit came out. And so that was kind of the focus, was how obese males respond to a CrossFit type workout. And really in my master's, it was my first introduction to research or conducting research on my own. And so that was the big takeaway. It wasn't necessarily informing my PhD. More of my experience as an athletic therapist is what really made me move towards injury prevention in that physical literacy area. But I think most of it was what I learned when I took away from my master's really was an interest in research. And I've done some reflecting over the years, and I see my time at Memorial kind of as a introduction to research as my main takeaway from that, not necessarily Some people will go through their schooling and have, this is my research area and this is, it's all connected. But I think these days it's kind of rare to have that, kind of stumble your way, and you ask 18-year-olds and to decide on their future in the first year of their undergrad, and they make mistakes. So anyway, that's what my takeaway for my master's was research and how to conduct research and that kind of thing.
It gets kind of addictive, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's hard to sometimes hard to focus on one topic. Where I'm getting pulled into some research here or some different topics here at Acadia, and it's just as interesting because I like research. So it's hard to stay focused on one thing, but that's something I need to learn, I think, if I want to continue on this career path.
That's awesome. I really love both of these topic areas, but let's stay close to your most recent research looking at physical literacy and injury prevention. Can you share with us what physical literacy is in more general terms? And I say that coming at it from the perspective of, what if I was a parent and someone said, hey, we're going to introduce physical literacy to your kids. But as a parent, I may say, what the heck are you talking about? Does that have to do with computer stuff, reading and movement? Can you share us what physical literacy is?
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting name, physical literacy. It was first, I guess, coined by a woman named Margaret Whitehead in the late 90s and early 2000s. And really, it's just like literacy. When we think of literacy, you think of reading, writing, understanding language. Physical literacy is generally someone's ability to be physically active. And there's a lot of things that go into that, but it's usually broken down into 4 different domains of physical literacy. These domains are knowledge and understanding. So I have the knowledge and understanding that physical activity is important for my life. Daily behavior. So participating in participating in physical activity on a regular basis. Motivation and confidence. So having the motivation and confidence to participate in physical activity. And where my research area mostly focuses is the 4th domain, which is physical competence. So having the physical abilities to participate in whatever sport or physical activity that you feel that you want to participate in. And by no means are these separate domains. They all inform each other. Having the knowledge and understanding that physical activity is important kind of pushes us or gives us the kick towards participating in physical activity as a daily behavior, and feeling motivated and having confidence makes us participate in physical activity. And then having good physical competence also gives us some motivation and confidence as well. So and it's been mostly implemented in children, these concepts of physical literacy. So it's kind of the idea is to set up our children well for future success in physical activity endeavors, whether it's sport or physical activity or whatever recreational opportunities they decide to partake in.
So I'm just going to dive into something that you just said there in regards to physical competence. Now, I'm not a parent, but I feel like if someone were to come up and say, your child, we're going to talk about physical competence, I think that could be an intimidating term that's used. Can you break down to what that means in regards to assessing a child's physical competence? And is that something that how people can pick up in areas of concern or areas of success in a child?
Yeah. So physical competence, it does sound intimidating. You're right. Mm-hmm. Really what we're looking at is, does your child have the fundamental movement skills necessary to participate in whatever activity that they want to participate in? So right. When I'm talking about fundamental movement skills, I'm talking about like jumping and skipping and running and throwing, any movement that would be considered something you would do in a sport or physical activity. So when we talk about assessing physical competence, it's just trying to understand how your children move and trying to see if they can participate in the sports or activities that they want to while also considering, well, if they don't have good physical competence, they might not actually participate in these sports with confidence, and they might not want to do it. So if we can help them improve their skills, then they will gain some confidence, be more motivated, want to do it every day, and they will kind of that whole physical literacy conversation.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's kind of the point of looking at physical competence and kind of presenting it in that way.
Right on. So when you wrote your article on in Thrive Neurosport, you also mentioned those four different areas. And then you talk about physical activity and promoting physical activity, and it's important to evaluate physical literacy. So we often leave this up to physical educators in schools. Now, is this something that should be happening before that, or is this something that could be happening before and after the bell? Is this something that parents can do, or is it just really up to our educators that we have, our coaches?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's, as everyone knows, probably, I think teachers they work very hard and they have a hard job. And I think phys ed teachers may also have an even harder job, because sometimes they kind of get thrown into being a phys ed teacher without having the skills or experience of learning how to become a physical educator. I have a friend on Facebook who I know personally went through music training and is now a phys ed teacher. And so it's, it just kind of happened. And so it's unfortunate.
I bet you the playlist for that class are phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, it would be fun, right? Fun to go into that gym class. But okay, yeah. So to answer your question, I'm getting sidetracked on phys ed teachers. It probably is the right place. Physical education classes is probably the right place to evaluate physical literacy. It would take some time out of class. It wouldn't be super fun for the students because it's kind of waiting, and in groups you would see how one child performs and then see how another child performs. So it's not conducive to a fun phys ed class.
Mm-hmm.
And it would probably need to be implemented from like a policy, Department of Education, governmental level into the curriculum for that to happen. But to capture as many children as possible, the phys ed classes would really be the place to kind of do this physical literacy evaluation. Most of the research in physical literacy is in the 8 to 12-year-old age range. There's a little bit in the 5 to 8. So we would definitely get that cohort in elementary schools. But we can definitely do it in after-school programs or extracurricular activities. There's some programs that are set up for promoting physical activity after school, which is great. But we know only some children, typically the higher socioeconomic status, would probably be participating in sports or extracurriculars. So we want to make sure that we're getting all of the children as we can. I don't know for sure if socioeconomic status would play a role in physical literacy, but it probably makes sense that it would, unfortunately. But this is kind of counterintuitive to my research, because I created a physical literacy assessment tool, but there is a tool called the PLAY tool, Physical Literacy Assessment for Youth.
Mm-hmm.
And they've designed it to be accessed by teachers and parents and coaches so they can evaluate children on a more individual level. So any of your listeners or watchers or anyone that's checking out your podcast might want to check that out if they're interested in this. It's PLAY, Physical Literacy Assessment for Youth. And I think that would be a good way if they're interested. They have a lot of good resources for students or for teachers and coaches and parents if they're interested in kind of understanding more about physical literacy and seeing where you can have like your child would score this and how that relates to like a regular cohort of that particular age or something. So
Right.
that would be something that would be interesting.
And if parents are just playing with their kids, what are some of the basic activities that a parent could use to kind of evaluate their child, or maybe to encourage some of or growth in their physical competence, like throwing, kicking, or those kinds of things? Or are we talking something a little bit more intense?
No, I like my whole, and we'll probably get to this conversation, but my whole thing is just get your children moving. It doesn't necessarily matter what they're doing, just get them moving. There is one of the non-profit organizations I've worked with in my PhD. It's called Champions for Life. You can look them up. They're based out of Montreal, and they do some really cool after-school activities with their children to try and promote physical literacy. And one of the things that they do with their kids, which I thought was brilliant, was balance tag. So they, tag your whatever, you tag your friend, they have to freeze on one leg and put a beanbag on their head. And so balance is one of the fundamental movement skills, being able to balance on one leg. So that's a really great way to spice up your tag a little bit more and also target some of those fundamental movement skills. One of the things with being a researcher is I'm a little less creative when it comes to those things. So I don't know if I have the greatest suggestions for fun, cool activities, but anything that promotes hopping or balancing or throwing or any type of cool creative activities that can get children doing a lot of different things would be good. I don't think it's the parents' role to worry about these things, worry about, are they moving well? Do they have good physical competence? Because parents have enough to worry about,
Right.
So I think just getting them out the door and doing things is what the parents' role would be in this.
So one of the things that you write about in the article from Thrive is that physical literacy encompasses competence and motivation to participate in physical activity, as well as the knowledge and understanding to participate in physical activity for life. So we already talked a little bit about what you meant by competence, but how does physical literacy lead to participation in physical activity for your entire life?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and that's where the research needs to go, I think. A lot of physical literacy. So the thought is, if we promote these ideas in children, so we encourage physical activity, we teach them the importance of physical activity, encourage them to participate on a regular basis, that they will carry these behaviors on through the rest of their life and kind of do that physical activity thing throughout their life. So that's the thought. But there's all kinds of disconnects in that. Children like to play. Children will probably go, most likely, not always, but some go into play sports or physical other recreation. But then when like the real world hits, maybe things change and we don't participate in sports and activities as much. We get injured. And so that's where the research needs to go, is trying to understand physical literacy in older populations and where are we with that. I'm not sure. In our own lives, we can kind of take a self-reflection on, are we participating in physical activity on a daily basis? Are we confident and motivated? And, maybe not so much sometimes. I can speak for myself, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is that promoting these behaviors in children will lead through life, but I don't know if it's always that's not always the case, probably. So it's focused in children, but I think people can kind of take this and apply it to their own life if it's something they're interested in.
Yeah, totally makes sense. It seems like physical literacy is more than just the physical activity part, though. Other than the physical domain, what other areas does physical literacy impact? So I'm thinking like in relation to school and socially related things.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I'm very in my silo of physical competence, and I'm not, so sometimes I lean more towards the science than the hard science and the softer science of the psych and sociology of it. But it's sports and physical activity and being active is really how children socialize. They go out on recess and they hang out and they play tag or whatever. And that's almost even more important than participating in physical activity, the social connections that we make and kind of socializing. And I think it's all just a conversation of one thing really, and that just making friends and connecting and being active. And so I don't think there's necessarily a direct connection. I guess you could say if my friends are motivated and confident and to participate in physical activity, then so will I, and I want to do that too. So I think promoting physical literacy, promoting social interactions, promoting recess and play, they all are in the same conversation. And I think it's just how to socialize children and create healthy lifestyles. I don't know if that's answered your question, but I think we got there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like too, like even things beyond just physical activity, it's how to work within a team environment, and there's so much benefit to it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Matt, in 2018, you and some colleagues published a paper looking at physical literacy and injury and its connection to injury prevention program. So now let's go to your wheelhouse. How is physical literacy linked to injury prevention?
Yeah, we were the first ones to really make this connection between physical literacy and injury prevention. And it took some time, but when we look at, so the way I kind of describe, we look at physical literacy, we've taken the 4 domains, and then we look at physical competence. And within that physical competence domain, we're looking at fundamental movement skills. So I spoke with them before: jumping, hopping, balancing skills, throwing skills, moving, things like that. And then to be good at these, they need to be able to move appropriately, move well. So for example, if someone doesn't run, it's not a great example. Jumping, that's a better example. If someone jumps and lands and their knees cave in when they land, that's an indication that they might have an increased risk of injury. It also would probably indicate they're not performing the movement skill as well as they could be. So this conversation about physical literacy and injury is kind of linked through the quality of movement. How well are these children moving? So a lot of our research looked at the connection. There's a lot of information about ACL injuries and risk factors for this anterior cruciate ligament injury in the knee, and how to prevent these injuries. And we looked at this and then kind of looked at this movement technique piece, where that's a high risk or one of the indicators for an ACL injury if they don't move well or if they have poor movement technique. And then kind of thought, okay, well, a lot of these assessment tools, they look at how fast you can do something, how fast can I run from point A to point B, or how many times can I jump on one leg. And that's good, and it's important to be able to do that. But these physical literacy tools weren't necessarily looking at, well, how are they doing it? If I can jump up and down 20 times, that's great. But if I'm jumping up and down 20 times and my knees are caving in every time, I'm at an increased risk of one of these ACL injuries. So that's kind of where our assessment tool came from, was this kind of connection and looking at movement quality, not necessarily performance or how fast they can do something.
That is awesome. Injury prevention is I know is near and dear to your heart. And as you get older, it's pretty important because we've talked on our podcast about injuries that we struggle with. But what I'm curious about is, can a sound physical literacy base in a kid be linked to long-term injury prevention in adults? What are your thoughts with that?
Well, first, Jackie, I have to say, I reluctantly retired from competitive soccer because I was getting older and realizing I should probably not hurt myself. So yeah, I get it. As we get older, things like we have to kind of look out for ourselves because no one else will do it. But to answer your question, probably is the answer. I think I can't, as a researcher, I can't like say, yeah, for sure, this is the answer, because I don't know really what the answer is. But probably. So the idea is, so we know in adolescence, around the age of 13, females have a significantly higher risk of tearing their ACL compared to males. And there's a lot of reasons why, but are they really reasons why, or are they just kind of risk factors? We don't know why there's such a difference. And so that's kind of what got me into doing this research was, oh, that's really interesting. Why is there this difference between males and females? And what is happening in these earlier ages from 8 to 12 that's pushing them, or what sports are they participating in? What activities are they doing? How are they moving that might lead to an injury? So my thought is, if we can kind of identify some of these things that lead to an injury, lead to these ACL tears, maybe they can not have the ACL tears and be more successful in participating in physical activity throughout their life. But we already kind of touched on it, where in adulthood, we don't know necessarily what kind of challenges are going to come our way. But if we can not have children tear their ACL, then they're going to be set up a lot better than tearing their ACL, because sometimes people will completely abandon all physical activity because of one of these ACL tears, or any injury really. So the more we can reduce injury, the better it's going to be longer term. So I can't really say it's linked long term in from a researcher standpoint, but it just makes sense that if we can promote physical activity at a young age, then we should be more active throughout life.
Matt's next research project.
Yeah, that's a lifetime of research right there. But I do have to say, I'm interested in physical literacy in older adults. I think it's an interesting topic. There's a lot of parallels between children and older adults in terms of their movement capabilities. A lot more complicated things with older adults, but it's quite an interesting link. And then we have from 13 to 65 in between, where there's a lot of other populations that we need to understand physical literacy in as well. But it is a really interesting research area to kind of look at it across the lifespan.
So interesting. And we kind of talked about your take on physical literacy is movement. And as a parent, I know that movement is really important to your health and to the health of my child from a long-term health perspective. But is movement more than just telling our kids to go outside? What's your take on the type of movement?
Well, that's a good question. I feel I get into this. I don't have children, but just in my own life, I overthink and worry about my long-term health and longevity. And I can't imagine what it's like to be a parent worrying about teaching these things to a young child. I don't know. I can't really say that it should be the parent's responsibility to be worried about these things. But some things that the parent should worry about would be getting them out the door to play. Playing is really important because children will encounter situations where they may be at risk of an injury, and then they'll figure out a way to avoid that risk of injury. And then when it comes up in sports, then maybe they won't have that injury happen. Mm-hmm. So playing all kinds of different movements, different settings is really good. Something else a parent can do is not have their child participate in one sport only. There's a conversation about early sport specialization. We see it a lot in gymnastics, where children, usually females, get put into gymnastics at a really young age, and then they just stay there and only do gymnastics 12 months of the year. and that can lead to, and it has been linked to some injury later in life. And we see it with hockey, especially in Canada, right? A lot of people will play hockey all year long, and that can lead to injury. So you see it a little bit. Some of the guys in the NFL are saying this, like, oh, I played basketball and football growing up, or I played baseball and football. And Patrick Mahomes is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and he says that like he played baseball and football growing up, and he attributes his success to being a multi-sport athlete. And I think participating in different sports, baseball in the summer and basketball in the winter, or something like that, is something that parents can do and should encourage their children to do, is to participate in different sports. But I think it's really the coaches and phys ed teachers and other professionals that work with children on a regular basis that should be helping the children move better. I don't think it's necessarily the parents' responsibility. Of course, you're going to want to, but just get them out the door, participate in soccer and volleyball and whatever sports that they might be interested in, and encourage them to try different sports. And I think that's, you're doing a good job if you're doing that.
Awesome. Just touching on the point that you shared about how one sport might increase your chance of injuries. Do you think that is because of the repetitive movements over time, or is it back to like being younger, when you're playing, you're adapting, you're moving differently?
Yeah, I think that's a challenging question. I don't know if we know the answer for sure, but it's probably from repetitive movements, doing the same thing over and over and over. And by doing the same thing and over, we can develop these muscular imbalances in our body. So if I'm, whatever, a right-sided hockey player, my shoulder might be up higher on one side because I always pass on that side of my body, right? So those kinds of things can happen. But also the movement thing, where they're only being exposed to one movement environment, especially if, I'm playing soccer my whole life, and then all of a sudden I have to walk on ice because it's cold outside and I've never done that before. I'm not really, that's an easy example, but those kind of things, I'm not equipped to walk on ice because I played soccer my whole life, or I played soccer and then someone recruited me to play football, and now there's people running at me with pads on and I don't know how to deal with that. Things like that can also contribute. But I think the multi-sport thing, we don't know for sure. Maybe Jackie, you might have some more insight to this, but I don't think we know for sure about why multi-sport athletes kind of do better. But there's research kind of going into that about why participating in one sport might be a not so good thing.
Yeah, I can't really comment on that, Matt, either. I assume it has to do with transference of skills and, like you had said, prevention of, repetition of the patterning of the activity again and again. But yeah, I don't have anything more to answer than Dr. Miller.
I find it so interesting. Okay, so back on track. How can we as parents help our kids to be more physically literate, particularly when they've basically been told to be physically and socially distant this past 18 months or so?
Yeah, that's a challenge, isn't it? I think it's a challenge for everybody. We're all trying to figure out how not to be on our screen so much. I think probably finding ways, I don't know, like I said, I don't have children, but finding ways to get them off the screens would be one, but using screens to your advantage and connecting them to other children over Zoom and doing some yoga class or something like that would be helpful, or kind of finding a video on YouTube that they can watch and kind of move along with whoever's doing the workout or exercise or dance or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that are going to help kind of integrate our new technology-driven life and kind of trying to get people moving. One thing that this is kind of a side topic, but I'm running some of the community programs here at Acadia, and we have older adults that come on campus, and then we have our 19-year-old students, kind of training them, showing them how to exercise or whatever. And one of the students told me, well, my participant really likes to dance. And I'm like, okay, we can work with that. And so I told all the students, because they're the TikTok generation, like, show your older adult how to do a TikTok dance as a warm-up or something, so using whatever technology that we can to kind of get in touch with physical activity and help children move, I think is good. I don't know, but I don't think it's as it was when I was a kid, and probably when you were children, just go outside and play, like go in the wood, like we would just run around in the woods and just kind of, I don't think that happens so much anymore.
No.
So yeah, so whatever you can do to use technology and connect children with each other in doing physical activity is going to be helpful. But I think things are kind of getting better. Going to a park and staying socially distant would be good. Kind of doing whatever you can to get people connected and moving will be helpful.
I always remember when my kids were in elementary school, and so we're talking 12 years ago, thereabouts. And I remember it was a rainy day, and I had gone into the school, and the school had bought Dance Dance Revolution. I didn't know what this thing was, but all the kids were in the gym doing this dance to Dance Dance Revolution. And it was, obviously some kids were gaming, but I thought, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Instead of all the kids, doing nothing, they're actually doing something, and it's physically active at the same time. So kudos to that school. I was super, super pleased to see that. One of the most eye-opening studies that I read was the Pacey study that was done that looked at physical activity levels of children and youth in 2005. So again, I'm dating myself. And one of the frightening things for me in reading it was physical activity levels declined considerably as the kids aged through high school in Nova Scotia, with about 90% of the kids participating in appropriate levels of physical activity in grade 3 to less than 10% in grade 11. And I remember, alarmingly, there was less than 1% of females participating in physical activity in grade 11. That was 2005. Do you think that there's any difference today? And I know that you haven't done any research on this. Do you think that that might impact physical activity levels or injury levels in the future, considering we've been in a pandemic for the last 18 months? So is there a difference in physical activity today? And what are the long-term ramifications, if you could forecast, for a lack of physical activity, if that's the case?
I think there is a difference. We definitely see more females participating in physical activity, but there's still a big difference between males and females participating. And there's still a big problem with sedentary behavior, I'll put it as, I guess, especially with gaming and things like that becoming, in some cases, legitimate career paths. If you're really good at it, you can make some money, but that's exceptional and rare. So it does become like a hard discussion probably with some children to stop playing your games and go do something else. So I think probably there's more children participating in physical activity, but as they don't have to, once they kind of leave, I don't know if it would be grade 8 or grade 9 after they do that. Maybe they don't have to take phys ed. I don't know what it's like in high schools. But it definitely declines significantly once they leave high school. And, the long-term ramifications would be multiple. Like, if they don't participate in physical activity and they decide to never participate in physical activity, that's probably okay for their injury risk because they won't be putting themselves at risk for injury. But then they have other things to worry about as a result of their physical inactivity, or cardiovascular problems and neurological problems, and increased adipose tissue and things like that would be a big challenge for people that aren't physically active. So I think, yeah, it's a problem. And the pandemic in general, I mean, there's, of course, all kinds of problems with the pandemic. But we see it, as I'm sure you're seeing it, Jackie, at Sheridan. Students are less prepared to be in person. I also would say that athletes are less prepared to be in person as well. Sports are coming back, and there's different people have responded differently. So some people really leaned into physical activity and did a lot of it over the pandemic, and other people couldn't do that. And we're seeing that with all now that things are coming back. I think we're probably a little bit more opened up out here in Nova Scotia than you folks are. So we're seeing a lot more participation, but there's increased injuries and more people, a wider range of physical conditioning and physical abilities because of this pandemic. And I don't know what it will be like, ideally, well, from my setting in a university, once kind of this cohort kind of moves on, hopefully, ideally, things will be back to normal, and it won't be such a significant impact. But with this cohort of students, and it's just, it kind of goes back to first years, grade 12 to grade 11, and whatever year they're in, they're going to carry that with them. And particularly in physical activity, they might not choose to do physical activity at all because they had a poor experience, or they missed out on those, grade 6 cool thing that they do in grade 6 in phys ed, and they missed out on that. And then they were like, well, forget it, I'm never going to do this, I want to do gaming. So I mean, it's a big discussion and something that we probably can't control, because what'll happen is the phys ed teachers, when they get them in grade 7, will be like, oh no, they're so behind and we have to catch them up on what they're missing, or this is, and they won't be able to because they're trying to teach them grade 6 and grade 7 things. And I don't know how to kind of solve that problem, but I think just moving in general is my message. I think get moving. Yeah,
I love it.
Now, is it physically possible for a child to bridge that year gap of physical literacy? So if they were at school in grade 5, missed grade 6, and coming back in grade 7, is it physically possible for a child to regain that, to start where they left off?
Oh yeah, I think so. It might take some extra work on the child's part, though. So they would need to understand the importance of it and why they are being asked or being told to do these things. But we see in the 8 to 12 age range, or any age range really, below 13, there's a wide variety of heights and weights and arms lengths and legs lengths and growth spurts. And so I think it's not a lost cause at all, especially for children that have not gone through the growth spurt. I think that they're very resilient and they can learn quickly. After the growth spurt, it's a little bit different. There's some awkward years in there with learning how to move their body, and then I'm talking, growth spurts and how fast people grow is another risk factor for injury. So that's a different discussion for a different day probably, but I definitely think that children can regain or make up for lost time, for lack of a better word, on these years of not having physical activity or structured gym class.
So I think maybe what you're saying is the longer the gap, the longer or harder it will be to kind of fill the missing opportunity or regain that physical activity.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think that just kind of is probably the case in adult life too. The longer you go without physical activity, the harder it is to get back into it. And it would probably be even more so for children if they just don't participate in physical activity from the age of 8 to 13. They're probably not even interested in it and won't want to do it. So trying to encourage them to play and go out and do things. And I guess that's to kind of circle back to how the parent, Jess, you were talking about the parents' role. I think maybe more so now in the pandemic, after the pandemic, it would be good to kind of encourage your children to play and go out and do things because of the lost time they may have had from not doing phys ed on a, I don't know if it would be daily in elementary schools, but a regular basis.
I think my little guy is in grade 1 and they have gym back this year, which he is very excited about. It's still outdoor, but he gets every other day.
Okay, that's pretty good. I think as at minimum, it would be like 3 times a week.
Mhm.
So that's, yeah, I think that's pretty good.
And they have recess and everything as well,
Yeah.
but structured 3 times a week in his grade anyways.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I'm glad to hear that they can go back into the gyms and do things. Yeah, good to get them moving.
Matt, I have a question that I've been quite curious about. I have 2 boys, as you know. One sagittal plane motion, like really great as far as amazing runner. But anytime you do any cross body stuff, he just like swimming for him is almost impossible. Never injured, but he's only 18. The other kid, that kid could pick up a ball and do anything, like just phenomenal skills, but kind of more so along the lines of injured. Now, you could say, well, one's more aggressive than the other. But the question I'm asking is, do kids naturally, like, are there some individuals who are naturally physically literate, like they know where their body is in space? And there are other kids that, you know, like my kid, someday he's going to learn how to do a breaststroke or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know if I know the answer. It's probably like a nature versus nurture type discussion. You know, what is it, something that they are born with and they can do, or excuse me, something they can learn? I don't know. I think there's a lot, you know. Is your one child more interested in the sagittal plane, the running movements, and maybe he was just drawn to that and that's what he likes to do, and he probably does like it because he can't do the cross-body things, and then he focuses on doing that more and has more confidence, more motivation to do that type of activity, and it just kind of feeds into being better and doing that activity more. But I don't know the answer to that, and there's probably some genetic components as well. You know, as I'm learning, my sister and I are very different people, but we were raised in the same household. We went to the same school, high school. We went to the same university. She went to Acadia as well, and we're just different people. And so there's a lot of impacts that genetics has as well. And that is something I don't know very much about at all. So I don't think I can speak too much to that.
No worries.
That doesn't really answer your question, but it's definitely interesting to kind of ponder about those things.
Matt, welcome to the world of research. It's interesting how there's always more questions to ask. And I love that, where it's like, I don't really know, but you could see your brain kind of moving a little bit saying, oh, that would be a great study. I know that's where you're kind of going with this. Matt, once again, thank you for joining with us. I would love for you to come back and share some of your research, looking even at gut health and obesity. We really wish you the best with your future career. However, if some of our listeners are interested in learning more about your work, where can they go and how can they contact you?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the time and giving me some time to talk about things I'm interested in. I don't really have a website, but they can go on the Acadia Kinesiology website, and under faculty and staff, my name will be there. And they can see some of my CV is there, and my email address is there, and they can see my research interests. So that's probably the best place to find me. I don't really do much of the social media. I'm on social media, but I don't use it for research purposes. I've tried that. It's a lot of work and not a lot of fun. But through the Acadia Kinesiology site, that would be the best place to kind of see where I'm at, and the things that I'm doing, and contact me would probably be the best way to do that.
That's awesome. Thanks again, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching and listening to this week's episode of the Food and Fitness Podcast. Join us next week when the hosts of the Food and Fitness Podcast sit down to reflect in our Team Huddle episode.